My name's Nick Bundock and I'm the team rector here at St James and Emmanuel Church in Didsbury. We have two churches, one called St James, which is 800 years old, one called Emmanuel, which is 150 years old, but we're one church with two buildings. And in Emmanuel Church, we have a BBC studio where they broadcast the daily service almost every day throughout the year, where we have visiting choirs come up and a range of presenters. And I'm one of the presenters on the daily service. I usually do it about once a month, sometimes once every couple of months. It depends on their schedule. Okay, well, the daily service is a mixture of hymns, anthems, prayers and stories that is put together between the presenter and the director of music that day. So the director of music will be given a theme, a reading from the Bible and an overarching theme, and they'll put together a range of music, a few hymns, an anthem, maybe something more contemporary. And then that's given to the presenter, which is to me, and I will then put that all together in an order with speech in between the various elements that create one whole framework of a service. And then the producer looks at it and makes some amendments and changes it, says it might be a bit over time or a bit under, and then we get to the day of the broadcast itself. And we do a complete run through, and it's all timed down to the last second. So there's absolutely no sense in which things might go over or under. The thing is timed to perfection before we go live. And then when we go live, you hear this, the beeps on the radio, and you know that suddenly you're going live in front of 250,000 people across the country and also around the world, because there's an internet presence as well. The really interesting thing about having the daily service at Emmanuel is that wherever I go in the country and people ask me, oh, where are you the vicar of? And I say, oh, I'm from St James and Emmanuel in Didsbury. They go, oh, is that Emmanuel where the daily service comes from? And I go, yes, it is. And it always starts a really interesting conversation with the person I'm talking to, because some people have been listening to the daily service their whole lives. It's got a very dedicated following throughout the country. And people always ask me, is Emmanuel Church on a Sunday like the daily service during the week? And actually I have to say, well, it's not really. We're a bit more contemporary than the daily service, but it always opens a really interesting conversation about our church. But the other thing about having the daily service in Emmanuel is that it brings a lot of traffic onto our website. Well, because we're a Church of England church, our parish is really important to us. We're basically a local church, and so everything about the local community matters to us. Obviously, as a vicar, I do lots of baptisms and weddings, particularly at St James's, which is a beautiful old church, and we get many, many weddings each year. But one of the biggest areas that we're involved in the community is through our schools. So we've got one Church of England school that's 400 years old, and we've got another one due to open in September this year, a 420 pupil admission primary school in West Didsbury. So we're educating a lot of children in our local area, and that becomes a really big and important area of ministry for us as a church. So every year we're interacting with hundreds and hundreds of families through our schools, as well as the work that we do directly as a church. In our buildings here, we've got all sorts of art classes and exercise things and things for children. So all in all, we're kind of, us and the community act as one. We're very integrated with the local community. Our listeners are from throughout the world, actually. I remember once I did a broadcast on the daily service, and the next day I got an email from a school friend who had heard me on their internet radio in Canada. And they got in touch to say, I couldn't believe my ears, but I heard you on the radio in Canada this morning when I woke up. So that's probably the furthest that I've ever heard contact from anybody is from Canada. But we certainly have a listenership of about 250,000 here in the UK, but I don't know how many listen throughout the world. There's a lot of expatriates I know listen, like my friend from school. I think it has. Lots of people know that the daily service comes from Emmanuel Didsbury because they listen to the show. But also, as I've mentioned earlier, it brings a huge amount of web traffic through to us. Particularly when there's a Sunday broadcast from our church, you can see this spike, this really big spike in the number of visits to the website as people try to work out, that church that they've heard on the radio, who are they, where are they, and we get a massive spike on the website numbers. Since the BBC moved up to Salford, a huge number of people in the media industry moved from London and have made their home base in Manchester. A lot of those people have settled in Didsbury, and they've joined our church because they know about Emmanuel Didsbury from their media world. And so we now have a large number of BBC employees who are members of the church family. So we've become, I guess, in a way, there's a cluster of media interest around Didsbury, both because of the BBC in Salford, the BBC daily service, and because this is a desirable place for people in the media industry to live. So we've become a kind of almost like a media church, as it were. My most memorable broadcast was actually a near disaster, as you can imagine. The producer on the day, who I like very much and is a good friend of mine, actually started changing the script in the kind of 10 minutes before we went live, and he was adding bits and taking bits out and scrawling all over my script that I'd carefully prepared. And there's always somebody else present who times every single element of the script, so that there's absolutely no question that we'll be over or under time. But because of all these horrendous last minute changes, the timings had all got completely wrong. And during the final hymn, the producer pipes up on my headphones and goes, you've got 20 seconds in hand. I don't know what you're going to do. You've got 20 seconds to fill. All our timings have gone wrong. We're on the last verse. Sorry, over to you. And suddenly I had 20 seconds to fill with absolutely no script. So I took the final blessing and just made it the longest blessing that you've ever heard in the history of the church. And fortunately, I managed to get the whole broadcast to finish exactly on time. I guess as preachers and pastors, ministers of churches, we're driven and we feel called to say something significant or helpful or insightful about the work of God. And we're content and happy to do that within our local church context. That's usually what we're called to do. But suddenly when you have the medium of radio available to you, you're speaking to an audience that's so much bigger than your own church congregation. So normally on a Sunday, I may preach to 100, 200, maybe sometimes 300 people. But when I get in front of that microphone and I'm speaking to 250,000 people, it suddenly becomes the most significant thing that I will do that month, even that year. And I'm aware of the responsibility of the things that I'm saying, that they have to be faithful to Christian truth, and they need to bring comfort and help to the people who are listening. So it's a big responsibility, but it's also a massive audience that suddenly opened up to me. Although obviously you can't see your audience when you're doing broadcast, you know that your audience is being touched by what's being said, because every day we get letters, usually addressed to our church actually, because they think that the daily service is us. They don't send it to the BBC, they send it to our church. And those letters are filled with thankfulness and stories about how the service has touched their life that day, or it was just what they needed to hear. And those letters pour in all the time. So we're aware that what we do through the radio has a big impact on people's lives.